And now we're going to move to our first afternoon panel. I would like to introduce Dr. Bernice Garnett. Bernice is coming up. Okay. Dr. Bernice Garnett is a public health prevention scientist at UVM's College of Education and Social Services. She is joined today by her colleagues and educational professionals who are all working collaboratively on the Act 67 community schools model here in Vermont. The Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships is a proud funder of this research project that is supporting a powerful new model for rural education in Vermont. And I'll let you take it away, Bernice.
Awesome, thank you, Tricia. Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome up my colleague, DeCarolis from the Agency of Education to the panel. We are going to set the stage for our panelists, giving a quick 10-minute overview about community schools, and then we'll invite really the magic of this show up to the panel to describe community schools in action. But before we do, I just want to acknowledge and express my deep gratitude, Senator Leahy, to Marcel, to Tricia, to Michelle, to the Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships. This has been an incredible 2 days of a lot of learning, and I'm really excited to share with my colleagues and partners in the field about the work of schools. I've been really excited and energized to hear about rural development and community mindset and relational trust and going slow, but what's been absent over the past 2 days is the power of schools. Schools are often the epicenter of rural communities, and they're a place of deep assets, deep connection, deep trust, and so hopefully you'll be inspired to think creatively about the ways to partner with schools in new ways or bolster existing partnerships. So, just a little bit about where we're going today. I'd like to invite our panelists to come on up. So joining us from the Agency of Education, DeCarolis, who's the Division Director for the Student Pathways Division, Johannes Haensch, you want to wave, who's the Program Manager for the Student Pathways Division. And we have two esteemed community school principals in the building here today. Jason DiGiulio, you want to wave, the principal of Hazen High School, which is in Hardwick, Vermont. I feel like Hardwick, Vermont has gotten a lot of love these past 2 days with the civic standard and all the theatrical and amazing stories of connection. And then Becca Tatistcheff, who's currently the principal at Cabot, which is a PK to 12 school up in Cabot, Vermont, and will be onboarding as the U32 principal. And then my UVM colleagues, Peter Knox, Research Assistant Professor in the College of Education and Social Services, and then Colby Kervick, Associate Professor in Special Education in the College of Education and Social Services. So that's who's up here. But before we get started, we'd like to hear a little bit from you. And we were told we were using Mentimeter, but we're the only panel yet to use it. But we follow directions. So we are excited to have you all engage in this. And my colleague Jess is going to introduce it.
Sure. So hi, folks. DeCarolis from the Agency of Education. Really delighted to be here. And our prompt today is, what word comes to mind when you think about the term public education? And I think this is really relevant right now. What is the role of public school in your mind?
So if you hold up your phone to the QR code, it should lead you to the Mentimeter. Yeah, it is. Awesome. So we'll take a couple minutes.
So in addition to really enjoying the floating thumbs up that keeps coming up from the bottom right, I think what folks can see for themselves is remaining at the center is community, right? So we can certainly talk about equity and everyone and accessible, even in the margins when we're thinking about the original social network, like that one, and thinking about connection and thinking about supportive, but really that community, school, when we're thinking about public school, community is at the center. Because public education and education, it's relational in nature, right? So all of these words that are describing it sort of center around community and identify a hope for our communities. Excuse me.
There we go.
This one?
Teamwork, yeah.
Okay, so what are Vermont community schools? And before we get started, I do want to just say a few thank yous. We do have 2 of our cohort up here, but we had 5 communities who were actually awarded. And really, these are the intrepid adventurers who took a risk beginning in 2021, who, yeah, it is, just giggle over there. But at the height of the pandemic, when our public education system, our entire sort of sense of self and community and state was absolutely rocked. Everything was different, everything was disorganized. These folks took a risk to do something new, to do something different, to advance learning, not only for the students within their school buildings and within their districts and supervisory unions, but really for all families, for communities within the state and across the state. Sure. I also want to take a moment, too, to thank the legislature, because they also took a risk, and they had a vision. And whether they intended it to be a vision, in passing Act 67, they had a thought about what we could do in public education. And I want to thank both the legislature in 2021, but also this year in communicating a continued commitment to this vision. And I think there are a few maybe in the room, maybe just one, that I would like to acknowledge. So if folks could stand up to say, so we could say thank you. We know how hard your work is, and we know that this wasn't an easy year, so really appreciate that continued commitment. So what are community schools? 5 pillars define community schools in Vermont. There are 4 pillars that historically have been at the national level. Excuse me. Maybe I do need that little microphone. Do you mind?
You like to walk around.
I do like to walk around. Okay, so integrated student supports, when we're thinking about expanded and enriched learning opportunities, we're thinking about community and family engagement. These things are all understood. We're thinking about shared and collaborative leadership. Vermont decided to make a commitment to a 5th pillar that I think is really important to point out. Safe, inclusive, equitable learning environments. Not only does that reflect the values of Vermont, but it was trying to reflect actually what we could say are decades long of innovative landmark legislation and initiatives that have really rolled up to a systemic approach to thinking about public education that is high quality, that is equitable, and that can be innovative. We started with High Schools on the Move. We moved to the State Board of Ed's strategic plan in 2005. Act 176 in 2006, Act 44 in 2009. We then moved into Roots of Success in 2010 and in 2013, Act 77, which I think a lot of folks are maybe familiar with the Flexible Pathways Initiative, and really talking about, programs. But all through that line was a vision, and I think Act 67 has really codified a vision for public education that really has decades of history of duplicating or coordinating legislation. So and I don't want to read all of this. I think you can see the governance structure. We had a really dynamic cohort where we had K-12 schools, we had 7-12 schools, we had elementary schools and middle schools, and we had an entire supervisory union with, I believe, 12 school districts within that supervisory union. So as we do in Vermont, We like to do things differently, and we like to be unique, and sometimes we like to be complicated, but we were responsive to that complicated governance structure. Overall, we started serving 3,560 PK-12 students. This has grown in the 3 years of this grant program to over 5,000 students across expansion to additional schools. And so, and also because as we normally do when we prep for things like this, it's a bad idea. We were like, let's just have another cup of coffee, because that'll certainly...
And we're matching jumpsuits.
Yes. So we are trying to restrain ourselves. This is a very restrained approach. But we mostly want folks to hear community schools in their own words, because we also, and I believe the skit sort of talked about it yesterday, there's a tendency to have people speaking for other people all the time. We do that in government. We assign task force and boards in which you have people making decisions about communities and communities not being able to make decisions for themselves. And so we thought it was important that you would hear the community schools in their own words.
Community schools look very differently dependent upon the very specific needs of the community that they're serving.
So while we all have very different projects, the outcomes are all the same among all the schools. We want increased community engagement. We want a safer school. We want a more equitable school.
All schools seek to be community schools, but this model helps, I think, to prioritize what it could look like.
Basic needs have to come first in order for children to learn.
Where we see that change in student outcomes, and this is just an example, I have a high school student who is on the fridge of dropping out and is now going to early college next year because of the resources that Sam and her crew have predominantly helped provide.
We have students pursuing any number of fields that are related to or completely different from what they're getting in school.
Not all child learns the same as the next. She prefers to be a grease monkey, which I'm perfectly okay with. Her father is a mechanic. My son's father is also a mechanic. So for me, I feel like it's reinforced the importance of education for her, but it's also instilled in her the want.
So I think it does give students a sense that school isn't confined to, this physical space, and there are more opportunities for them, and we can connect with them with those opportunities.
So we see this multi-generational distrust in the system, right? And Sam and her crew are really responsible for shifting that mindset.
So that people understand that the building is a space for the community.
As a place for community to gather, to have conversations, to kind of personalize education and where that leads.
So to have someone who can maneuver their schedule to be out in the community, to be that liaison to the resources, services, supports, and also to get to know the needs of the community by being in it is really unique.
We've been able to partner with other organizations where in the past maybe we have competed for services or programming, and now we are working more collaboratively together.
This environment, the physical, emotional, and spiritual environment we're in needs to be accessible to students and cannot do them harm.
Do they feel like their culture and language that they're bringing is respected and valued in the classroom?
One of our goals in terms of the equity pillar was to do some school-wide reads, and now we're doing supervisory-wide reads, also holding conversations and facilitating conversations at our local library.
If we don't do that work, then our students who might be typically marginalized students won't have access to their education.
If the learning was more accessible, more relevant, more flexible, and the teachers could see the results of wrapping services and coordinating services between students, that we should see a reduction in absenteeism in 9th grade, and we saw that reduced by almost 50%, which is crazy, right?
What I want people to know is that every building needs a community schools coordinator. Every single building needs somebody dedicated to this work.
And it's been really great to see youth just really come out and become themselves, whatever that may be. So it's been super incredible. I think it's, it's hard to realize that the grant's ending.
I went to Philadelphia to that national conference. I was like in shock. There are 3,000 people that are doing the same work but I'm one of 5 community school coordinators in Vermont, right? So I just think the community school approach is something whose time has come.
Yeah, and we want to thank our ethnographic documentarian, Ned Castle, who's in the building. Ned, you want to wave? We heard a strong theme throughout these 2 days, the importance of animating stories in ways that are digestible, relevant, can combine the right side of the brain with the left side of the brain. And as a faculty member who's dedicated to applied research for social change, digital storytelling has been an unbelievable asset that our Community Schools Research Practice Partnership, through funding from the Leahy Center and continued funding from Senator Sanders, will be able to continue to do, because we find that these nuggets stay with the heart. They animate the work in ways that numbers and quotes can't. So thank you, Ned, for all the work that you do. I'm going to go quickly through this, but I'm going to talk about why we have university partner, a state agency of education, and community schools all hanging out together. This is a really unique, dynamic, interdisciplinary partnership that's all dedicated to making sure that Vermont families, young peoples, and schools are thriving. And that requires complex interdisciplinary partnerships that bring our unique expertise to bear so that the product of our thinking is greater than the sum of its parts. So as a faculty member who works at an institute for higher education, it's our moral and ethical responsibility to leverage the assets that I have through privileges of talking to people, accessing grants, getting to know Senator Leahy, getting to spend time with Senator Sanders and his team, to be able to support resources, financial, human, and social, so that we can sustain community schools in potentially ways in which you don't have a unique partnership might not happen. But that really requires cultural humility, which is not often a disposition that is rewarded in academic universities. And so to do this work, we've heard the importance of relational trust, going slow, not coming in hot to a community thinking you have all of the answers. I sent Jess DeCarolis a cold email in 2021 saying, I'm so excited Vermont passed Act 67 community schools. How can I help? And for a year, we met and just chatted. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't ask for data. I didn't ask for money. I just wanted to see how I could support. And that is demanded by a unique relational trust partnership. Before I even met Jason or Becca, I was a silent partner. UVM was a silent partner. And so I am encouraged, and I want to thank the university leadership for not only talking the walk about we do community engaged scholarship, but incentivizing it and structurally supporting it. And that's really critical if we want to sustain this as a land grant anchor institution, that our values have to be met with resources. And so the Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships is allowing us to extend the community schools model, because the grant funding will sunset this coming year, and we want to make sure that the ecosystem of community schools is sustained in Vermont, because this is a model that is powerful, that is working, and it's allowing schools to do what they do great already. There's so much good work happening in schools despite the narrative out there, and it's leveraging schools as a hub and spoke model so partnerships can happen around it, right? And so our research practice policy partnership combines research, UVM faculty, and students. One of the Leahy Institute for Rural Partnership grant priority pillars was getting UVM students out into rural communities. So we're really excited to share on our panel about how we're doing that. We've got our community school partners doing the work on the ground, and then our state agency of education partners that are doing the policy work, right? Because Vermont is a state in which we can have statewide impact in really tremendous ways. So we're excited to continue working together. And with this influx of funding from the Leahy Institute, we are really excited to continue this work. And I've also want to name and acknowledge Senator Sanders and his team that we've been working with for over 2 years, and finally have secured a congressional direct spending request to continue UVM's support of community schools in this state in a way that feels mutually beneficial and transformative through sustained partnerships. And so I am so grateful that I live in Vermont. I'm raising 4 kids in Vermont, and that I have access and opportunities to leverage these resources for schools. Oh, wow, that was an applause. So again, we are one of the inaugural recipients of the Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships seed grants. We were really stoked to be awarded this, and really it's the work that Jason and Becca are going to talk about that I think interested Senator Leahy and Marcel in the Institute for Rural Partnerships, because it's intergenerational meals, it's providing clinical mental health counseling graduate students, helping to support school-based health centers, and leveraging the assets of UVM. And so I'm going to let my colleagues Colby and Peter talk about it, and we're happy to chat more, but I do want to get to the panel. But we have sort of 3 major extension arms of the ways in which UVM, through listening to our community partners of what they need and how we can support educator well-being and student mental health, access to school-based health center primary care, wraparound services for young people, professional development, and opportunities to learn. And these are the ways in which we're leveraging service learning courses, faculty research, and opportunities for extension. My colleague Colby will talk about this in a moment on the panel, but we're really excited to leverage the student internship model and think creatively about how to support students getting up to Newport, which is a 2-hour drive from here, and thinking about just because we're not geographically proximate doesn't mean we can't support in creative ways. And so we have Mackenzie Keene, who's a second-year food systems master's student, will be supporting an intergenerational meal program up in Newport Town School, which Colby will talk about more in a moment.
Being a silent partner was a metaphor. So why are we doing this? Why do we have the research policy practice partnership? It's because of this. Our Vermont Portrait of a Graduate, it's not just a visual, it's not just an aspiration. We talk about it as a guarantee. When we think about what do we want for all of our students and our families, this is what we want. We want to guarantee that every student who graduates has well-being, right? Has agency, can be a global citizen, et cetera. And so when we do this work and when we think about the pillars, we know that it's driving us towards that guarantee. So with that, okay.
So Jess is going to join our colleagues on the couch panel style, and I'm going to serve as the moderator, which is good because then I can't take up too much space. So the first set of questions I'm going to direct towards our, so I should probably sit maybe too. That feels, yeah. To our community school principals, so Jason and Becca. As a school leader, what has been the most impactful outcomes of implementing community schools in your respective school communities? And academics love double-barreled questions. And what recommendations would you have to other school leaders who want to advance community schools?
Is this, oh, it is. Hi, folks. So again, I'm Becca Tatistcheff. I'm the principal currently at Cabot School. I've been there for about 4 years. I'm ending my 4th year. And one of the things that I think, I'm going to start with the second question, which is really that we start where we are, right? And so what that means is really thinking about, like, what's the place in which we were doing work. And for Cabot, that place is, just raise your hand if you have ever been to Cabot, Vermont. That's awesome. Great. And so you know that while you might have been there, there might be other people who are like, how do you get there and how do you get out of here? Because one of the things that is unique is that Cabot School is situated in the literal center of the community. It has a number of nonprofits in that community. It's only a community of about 1,500. And so we really started where we were. It also means that as a rural community, we have real transportation and access dilemmas. Just like that question of, like, what's the purpose of public education? If we want access to be there, then we need to create opportunity within the construct of the community that we live in. And so for us, that started with really thinking about how intergenerational Work could happen with after-school internship work and thinking about young people as resources and change makers in the community in which they live. And so in terms of our outcomes, some of the most amazing things that we now see is that we have a robust after-school program that is a work-based learning experience for our older 7th through 12th graders to run clubs and really enrichment clubs. So think robotics and pottery and crafting and photography and gym access and gardening. All of these things are provided for by local resources in the community. And that outcome of a parent and community member not having to travel to 30, 40 minutes away, not needing access to a car, but being able to be on site and receive the same quality of access to enrichment services has really been a game changer for our young people, and then created connected mentoring work across that. And so we're really excited that even with the sunset of the grant, the state has decided to support after-school programming, and that work will continue in Cabot, at least for the next 3 years. Through funding, it is free and accessible, and we are able, again, to provide paid leadership opportunities for our older young people in the community. So that's our first sort of like big outcome. And then the second piece is really, again, thinking about change makers and resources in the community. All of our seniors at this point have robust post-secondary plans. Many of them are tied to internship work that they have done. So whether that is interning for Vermont Adaptive, whether that is creating a Minecraft server that is for people living in the community. I'm gonna be a little like iffy on that one, but I understand it in theory. And, or creating art, or publishing and working with film reviewers. Those things have all happened through our seniors, or becoming a trainer of CPR and training our staff. So those are really concrete things that allow young people to be resources and change makers in our community, and also mean that we have inspired the space for all of our students in grades K through 12 present meaningful and real and relevant work at least once a year. And so the last piece I'll share with you before passing it along is that we welcomed 200 community members to a presentation of Learning Day in which young people worked on flower gardens and taught about pollinators. They introduced their trees that they had adopted in their forest classroom. They introduced the aquaponics system that they built in our cafeteria to make sure we can sustain salad bar. They opened a poetry trail in collaboration with the Trails Committee in town. All of those things, and that's just a snippet, happened in one day of young people really being agents of change in their community. So that's been really exciting.
Wow. So for Hazen, Hazen Union is a school of about 300 students in Hardwick, Vermont, grades 7 through 12. What? Oh, lift it up there. All right. 300 people, grades 7 through 12 in Hardwick, Vermont. So you've heard about Hardwick. And what's amazing about Hardwick as a community, it's sort of a gateway to the Northeast Kingdom, but it has all those characteristics of a Northeast Kingdom school in that it's geographically isolated, where in between resource providers, like if somebody needs mental health services and they're under the age of 18, they look 20 minutes in one direction or 45 minutes in the other if they're over 18. And not having a car or transportation issues really impacts people's ability to access resources. So we see schools as these largest investment of public funds that's most visible and prominent in a community. And communities take pride in the Northeast Kingdom in having their school, and everybody's local school is a good one for them. But those are the resources that are fallow when we're not in school. Like right now, my building's largely empty, right? And so
how do we leverage that power of the school as a physical space, as a meeting space, and as a coordinator of resources and a hub for others to raise the community around it? Because schools and communities are not separate. We tried to pretend we were after a lot of the school safety issues in the 2000s onward. We've made walls between us, but the school's learning environment is a direct reflection of the economic and spiritual and social health of the community. So when we have students who are not ready to learn, it's a reflection of a community that's not having its basic needs met, and where their struggles in the community translate directly to struggles in school. So what we've seen at Hazen in this short time, with just seeing schools a little differently, instead of saying, well, the job of the parents is this and schools is that, is just say, how can we help? And we might not be able to hold the resources, but we can help you make the phone calls. We can give somebody some office space. We can give meeting room. We can try to reach out and form a different kind of network and leverage the power of our relationships. What we've seen through purposeful action so far is about a 50% reduction in our absentee rate. So students are re-engaging after COVID and coming back to school because we're respecting them, I think, and we're showing them that we're committed to an equitable and safe learning environment. And that includes for their parents, many of whom have generational traumas related to their experiences in schools where they weren't quite welcome. And we're trying to bear witness to lives and see the power of story and just that people can be heard. And we might not have the resources ourselves, but we know people in our community who will know who has the resources, and we can communicate with each other and try. And then we also have to be willing, sorry, I'm mixing my questions.
Go for it.
So we also have to be willing to stand and hear the critique, like when Rose and Tara tell me, I don't care what the rules of school say, you need to do more, we need more. And we have to be present with each other and bear witness. So we've also set the environment where 100% of our faculty, well, one faculty member left to have a baby, but I think that's fair, right, to raise a family. We've retained our faculty for 2 years in a row. So they haven't left us, and they could work anywhere they want. And that's, I believe, because we're feeling the power of embracing a new way of schooling, which perhaps is a really old way of schooling, in that it takes all of our villages to hold each other up. And if the students are thriving, they're going to graduate and the community will thrive too. And if the community's thriving, then the students are ready to learn. And so the biggest lesson that I hope I could pass would be just it's a different orientation for a leader. And whenever I would say that's not the job of school, I have to stop and think, if it's not, how can I help hold that? If I don't own it, then can Rose help me? Can I help Rose? Can Tara help? Can the Center for Agricultural Economy help? Or someone? Because we have the experience navigating complex systems and not getting so frustrated. So maybe.
Thank you for those reflections, Jason, Becca. I'd be remiss not to mention John Dewey in this moment, only because he's one of the most famous graduates of UVM and buried about 3 blocks down here. And he wrote a paper that I reread this morning in 1902 called "The School as Social Centers." So the idea of returning to an old way of doing schools, or embracing schools as social centers for democratic schooling, for a democratic society, these are not new ideals. And I am just so honored to be able to walk behind you, Becca and Jason, and use the resources I can to lift up the work that you're doing, because it's absolutely amazing. So thank you. I'm going to pivot to our questions for our state Agency of Education colleagues from the Vermont Agency of Education. And again, pinching myself that I have the opportunity to collaborate with state government practitioners, policymakers, and leaders. This is really a unique partnership. And so, Jess and Johannes, what is the role of the State Agency of Education in supporting community schools, and what opportunities do you all see as State Agency of Education leaders for community school expansion and sustainability in Vermont?
Yeah, I can jump in on the first half of the question. Jess is the division director that I work under. She is a visionary person with really incredible vision and foresight. Me, I'm just a bureaucrat. I'm a spreadsheets guy. I like boring things. I said that during my interview and her eyes lit up. So when I'm looking at our role in this as a state agency, because this is being funded through a grant program and this is being funded through state money, we have a certain responsibility, right? Anytime we grant out money, we have this responsibility to the citizens of Vermont that we are spending their money wisely and responsibly. So anytime we have a grant program, there is a certain oversight component. But we knew that with this particular grant program, with the importance of relationships, with the importance of openness and willingness and experimentation that is so key to community schools, we knew that this couldn't be kind of a standard we show up with a clipboard type of oversight. We needed to really focus on relationships. We needed to focus on building connections and really having a trusted space. So we had the opportunity to create a space in which our awardees and the practitioners that we were working with felt empowered to be creative. They felt like they had the permission to attempt novel things. In a certain sense, we needed to give them space where it was okay to make a misstep. Try a thing, figure out it doesn't work, and then try a different thing based on that learning. And so that focus and creating that space while still honoring our responsibility and our duties to the people of Vermont was a really wonderful opportunity to really motivate and encourage and hopefully bear witness to some fantastic work.
Can you repeat the question?
Always challenging, Jess. What's the role of the SEA in supporting community schools? And what do you see as opportunities for our state agency of education in supporting the sustainability of community schools?
Yeah, so true confession, I was not necessarily in support of the initial passage of Act 67. I'll just start there. I was concerned that we were passing what felt like sweeping policy that impacted an entire system. It's not a program. It's not a strategy. It's a way of doing school. And we were doing it at the height of the pandemic with limited time funds. And it felt, frankly, like a recipe for disaster. And then certainly when I was assigned it, and then had to build the application over the 4th of July, there was some fist shaking going on. But I think from the beginning, it's about relinquishing the one-up relationship, right? Which is, we knew and I knew that we were going to ask folks to do something really hard at a really dynamic moment in time that would make them very vulnerable. And in so doing, that we had to have that experience ourselves. And so I think from the perspective of the role of the SEA, it's really important for us to think about what does it mean when our purpose is leadership, support, and oversight. And so often I think when we think about oversight, we go directly to accountability, right? We go directly to this is how you should be doing something. But in fact, it was important to flip it and say, no, we're going to conceptualize something called supportive accountability, which is we're not the ones who are going to be accountable. And nothing in requiring something of someone actually supports them in being accountable. But if we flip our relationship and say, our job will be to get elbow to elbow, to relinquish the one-up relationship, and to be present to provide support, that the work of accountability would happen naturally. And frequently, we have had conversations where it's like, okay, I want you to do less, right? Because it'd be like, well, we only have like 40 kids with mentors, and you're like, you know? So I think from the perspective of a state agency, it's really important. Policy communicates commitment, right? Policy promotes predictability. And if you don't have policy in place, what you're communicating is that it doesn't really matter, right? And so as we think about being the SEA, our job will be, how do we ensure that we have policy in place so that this work can continue, that we can scale it, and that we can sustain it?
Jess, that comment is reminding me of Tony Pippa's remarks yesterday about the lack of a coherent federal policy on rural development, and that we can't equate rural developmental policy with just ag policy. And I was scratching because I wanted to say, what about ed policy? We can't forget about education policy because it's inextricably linked to rural development policy. And that comment about policy as a commitment, I think there's a thread there of the role of a cohesive policy to ensure that programs can sustain. And I think we would all argue that community schools is the blueprint for Vermont public education. And through that, we think rural economic development and rural development can be nested within that structure because schools are the most important subsystem for the functioning of society. Dewey said that, not me. Okay, so we've heard from our community school principals, we've heard from our SEA leaders, and I'm gonna turn to my colleagues at UVM to hear, what's a university doing in this partnership? So, Colby and Peter, what's the role of a university partner in community school sustainability and implementation, and what assets can a university leverage to support community schools?
Sure. All sorts of ways universities can partner and benefit and work in collaboration with community schools in particular. Really thinking about what institutions of higher education have to offer. It's really infrastructure, different access to resources, and then human capital in terms of expertise and interdisciplinary research. These are kind of the three primary ways that we're seeing our university and our programs show up in the community school space. And it's also an opportunity for institutions for higher education to align their programs and student interests with the community identified needs that exist in rural spaces. So really kind of looking at what schools or what programs and policies exist in schools and figuring out a way for universities to align their own programs and student interests with those. And then I'd also say too, in terms of what we've been hearing from panelists and speakers throughout this conference is this idea of lifting up and centering rural spaces and rural communities in particular. They're often left out of research, and especially in education research too, that tends to be something that gets kind of pushed off to the periphery. And I think the role of a university in the community school space is really to help center and identify the specific needs and unique assets that exist in a rural space and incorporate those into research in a real equitable way. And it's really kind of leveraging those networks and resources and assets that schools might not have access to or might not have the capacity, or staff or infrastructure available to access grants and resources and funding streams and funding structures and other organizations and networks that exist that are working in this space. So that's how I think we're really seeing that show up in Vermont, particularly in Vermont where the University of Vermont is kind of the main game in town or a main player in town in terms of higher education. I'll let you handle the next one.
Yeah, and so in a concrete way, one of the things that the Leahy Seed Grant is really sparking in terms of our ability as faculty members at the university to leverage the assets of the university to support this work in rural parts of the state is through the engagement of our students. And one of the ways that we can engage students is through service learning, through internships that are both paid and credit bearing simultaneously, because it's important that we pay students going out into the field. But I think one of the things that's really exciting is that oftentimes when we think about schools and we think about internships, we have sort of the traditional notion of student teachers, right? So folks who are going out and doing pre-service work for their professional preparation. But the assets and the number of students who can engage in community schools within a university is so much broader than that. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, though, that the university has students doing incredible service to the state already. In fact, the College of Education and Social Services, which is my academic home, we've calculated that every year our students are giving 200,000 hours of service to schools and nonprofit organizations and community serving organizations yearly. Community schools gives us an opportunity to even expand that further. So over the last couple months, we reached out to our community schools cohort and said, hey, what do you need if we were able to connect interns from the University of Vermont in your schools and communities? What kinds of projects would you be interested in having UVM students support and engage with? And what's interesting is the wide variety of interests that surfaced. And that allowed us, as faculty members in the College of Education, to reach out to partnerships across the university to find those matches. So I'm going to give you a few examples. So up in the Northeast Kingdom, one of the needs that they identified is that they wanted to start an intergenerational community meals program because the principal noticed that, number one, food security is a huge issue up in that community. However, elementary school students are not great at eating their lunch all day long. A lot of food gets wasted and thrown in the garbage. And they also noticed that there's an epidemic of isolation around many of the elderly citizens in that community. And so this principal said, hey, I could start to get at the heart of addressing a food security, food waste issue in our district if I could get senior citizens coming into school to eat lunch with elementary school kids. Can you find us an intern who can create this program and help us put this into action? So we're partnering with the food systems program at UVM, who will have an intern up there next year helping to launch that program. Another idea they have that we're working on trying to match them with an intern is that they want to do a community needs assessment because one of the workforce challenges is the lack of access to childcare. And they want to explore the feasibility of actually establishing a childcare center that's part of the school district. So we're reaching out to folks in the community and applied economic development program, CDAE, at UVM to try to match an intern who can go up and do that community engaged process to support their interest around that. So another example is that one of our pillars that we're focused on through the SEED grant is mental health. And we know that it's not just youth who are experiencing mental health challenges, but also adults in communities. And so we are leveraging partnerships with our counseling program to place graduate interns in Cabot and Virgins who are going to be providing clinical mental health students, not just through the traditional ways we think about the school counseling programs, but giving those mental health services to families in those communities and to staff members in those schools. We're also working on accessing telehealth infrastructure and creating support for setting up telehealth infrastructure systems within schools so that families in those communities can get access to better primary and mental health care within those rural spaces because they already have relationships with coming into school, right? And so there's that connection that's already there. Some of the other things that we were looking at, Hardwick, there's exploration happening right now. Could we get a community development intern up there to work with the civic standard in the town of Hardwick in the school to develop more workforce learning opportunities for the Hazen Union High School students? What this has done for us, though, it has emerged in interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary partnerships across the university. We are engaging with the clinical psychology program now at UVM. Food systems I mentioned, community development, the public communications program, VCHIP, the medical center more broadly. Thinking about how do all of those other kinds of programs at UVM have opportunities to think about engaging the work that they do and the questions that their students are interested in within the context of schools and in our rural communities. And so I think that that's one of the really exciting ways to think about how do we think about exposing our students in terms of their own workforce development to the opportunity to work in rural spaces, to see the power and importance of being connected to schooling, because at the end of the day, at some point they're gonna live in a community, They may have children attending schools. They're going to be taxpayers in schools. So trying to sort of not see schools as a separate entity, but as being integrally involved with raising communities, workforce development, and the economic health of the state. Our partnership and our ability to leverage the human resources at UVM becomes critically important in that endeavor.
Thank you, Colby and Peter. That was really exciting and really speaks to the pipeline, right? And actualizes the land grant anchor mission of the University of Vermont. So thank you. So this question is for the whole panel, anyone who wants to jump in. So we have university partners, state agency of education partners, and school partners that are on our Community Schools Research Practice Partnership. So I'd love to hear perhaps from each one of those stakeholder groups, what's your experience been in this partnership? And what's the value added? What's the value added of this interagency organizational partnership dedicated to community schools? What's the value added?
I can start with one thing that I wanted to mention before is that, you know, as a faculty member in the College of Education and Social Services, it has been so joyful to reach out to colleagues in other departments across campus. And I just want to acknowledge our colleagues in food systems and community and international development and clinical psychology and the others that we've talked to, because we've found people to be so open and excited to engage in this kind of interdisciplinary work. And I really feel like that openness of even within the university, people wanting to partner together around new and interesting and impactful projects that are connected to community, that's resonating with a lot of people. So I'm really excited about what opportunities are in front of us.
I think for me, you know, I often leave our conversations together being like, these are my people. This is like, I learned something. Instead of somebody saying, yeah, you can't do that. You can't do that in school. You can't try that. I hear you can and you should, and what can I do to help? And I think that that is a really unique thing for a school leader or for folks working in schools to have relationally, right? Very often we feel constrained or constraints. And so to have a group of people who are just saying, explore, think about things differently, are alongside you in that journey, or alongside me in that journey, is just phenomenal.
And I would like to backpack on that a little bit too. One of the things we've been learning in orienting ourselves as more community-focused and minded schools and grounded in communities is that local people know best how to solve local problems. And this partnership has really stuck to that. And so we have thinking partners. I find I have thinking partners, I have support. The accountability is supportive accountability, where they're bearing witness to what I'm doing and what we're doing, and then can reflect it back when we think we're failing often. And because nothing is ever enough for our communities and for our kids and our families, there's just never enough. And so seeing the good where it is has been really profound. And letting us try to solve our local problems with the resources from away and the help and the reflection, but not trying to tell us in a paternalistic way what to do, has been really powerful.
So this is very unusual for us to be sitting, too. And by the way, you never see principals sitting, so take a snapshot. You know, I think folks have touched on this. The power of this and entering into this opportunity, getting that first cold call from Bernice, making a decision that I was going to take every call, which I stopped doing after a year of meeting weekly. But, you know, this idea that we all have skill sets. I've been a practitioner. We've engaged in research. We are policymakers. But that to not have to do it all, to create the protected space for the practitioners to practice and not also have to be evaluating levels of evidence of a particular intervention, right? To have the opportunity to engage in research, knowing that that will help to inform policy, because we want to make sure that we codify those things that work well should continue. But mostly, I think, to create a space in which we always talk about at-risk students, schools at risk of being identified, schools at risk of failing, but flipping that script and saying, isn't it amazing that we have schools who are willing to take risks, that we have leaders who lean into risk-taking, who create students and learners who are brave enough and free enough and agentic enough to take risks instead of being deemed as someone at risk. That's what we want for our students, and I think this partnership has allowed all of us to take risks and see policy as permission to exceed, to excel, not policy to constrain, to diminish, to, yeah, we've got 5 minutes. I'm just gonna precipitously end that statement right there.
Anyone else want to? I just want to echo my deep gratitude for being in this partnership. It's every academic's dream to hope that your research informs policy. Like, that's why I went to school forever. It is a unique and rare opportunity that a state agency of education division director would answer a cold email of like, hey, let's hang and see if we can do something together magical. And so for me, it has reified my commitment in a time in which it's easy to shell and go into your own cylinders of excellence because partnerships are hard and messy and take time, that this is the only work I want to do. So thank you all for re-energizing all of us and making this commitment the only possible option of how we do work and how we do schools. So now that you've had an opportunity to hear about community schools, we're really curious about how you see opportunities to connect with community schools in your own personal orientation to life, your own professional orientation to life, what organizational identities you might carry. What opportunities do you see connecting to community schools? So this is a Mentimeter, potentially. Yeah, there we go. So if you hold up your phone to the QR code, we'd love to hear your thoughts. This isn't a one-word answer. This is hard. I'm seeing connections, more discussions, making research findings accessible, showing up. Showing up is critical. Offering skills for mentorship, volunteering, workforce. These are wonderful. So as you're still thinking about adding to this, I do want to, we do have a new website, the Catamount Community Schools. Oh wait, I don't know if I can change because the Mentimeter's up. So our last slide will be that, but we do have 2 minutes and 37 seconds. If anyone has a question from the audience for our esteemed panel. That's pretty on par actually with how time runs in this group. So there are mics around if anyone does have a question for the panel. Over here, yeah.
In Cabot and in Hardwick, what programs are available for G&T, gifted and talented students, grades K through 12?
Right, so as a proud graduate of gifted and talented programs, when I was a child, I can tell you that if I'm not good at something right away, I give up. And so, you know, we've learned a lot in the years since then. So I don't know that there's anything overtly organized. We have advanced placement, early college, and dual enrollment and concurrent enrollment courses. And we encourage our students to develop a personalized learning plan in concert with their lead community members and parents or guardians in order to strive and reach a pathway that's open to them rather than having something programmatic.
Are your AP classes online? Or?
No, in person, sir, but we do have, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I said, are the AP courses provided, instruction provided by your faculty or by done online?
The majority of them, I'd say 90% of them are in person, but we do have the smattering of an online for like, you know, an HSK4, like if a student was looking at Chinese 4 or something, that would be online.
We don't use the term gifted and talented, and we talk about real relevant work that is rigorous and meaningful in the community, and every young person has gift and talent in doing that.
Thank you. I think there's a question over here. Thank you.
Yes, I'm wondering what the Partnership Collaborative has meant in terms of mentorship and professional development programming. What has been changed, sustained, and innovated?
Are you referring to mentorship and professional development for the adults or for the?
For the adults.
For the adults, yeah.
To enact and in this collaborative manner.
So I might suggest, like we've been building a really strong and robust mentorship program that's intergenerational for our students, and we're finding it helps the adults develop. I find in my own development as a school leader that I don't know that anything in my professional background prepared me for the orientation shift that I needed to make in order to embrace this way of approaching school. And so I hope that as the research is codified and our stories are told and we understand better about the processes involved, that those will inform school and community leadership, seeing us as more integrated and responsive to each other.
Yeah, and I can also add on that I think it's prompted conversations. Number one, it's been really cool that we've all gone to professional conferences together, right? And so that part has been a great opportunity, but it's also allowed us at UVM to think about like what is our role in helping to support professional development around the state related to community schools, and how do we create pathways for people who are working in schools or community partners who want to learn more about community schools, have access to that. So part of our Leahy funding is supporting our launch of a microcertificate that has a community schools focus that will be accessible for folks who want to get more engaged and do more professional learning, and we have funds to support scholarships for that. So that's pretty exciting.
I was told we can do one more question. Yeah.
Hi. First of all, I love what you're doing. I think it's amazing. How are you managing the disability community within the community school collaborative? I know just it's extra resources and extra challenges on top of the challenges that you already have.
I think from the perspective of looking at this over the course of 3 years and really using site visits and that participatory action research approach to inform the development of a framework for implementation of community schools in the state. And again, because frequently national models just do not fit a small rural state such as Vermont, what bubbled up authentically was this theme of access. And I think, like curb cuts, what has happened is coming from approaches of universal design for learning, coming from approaches of, what engages families, students, community members, finding that investing, and frequently investing local dollars, right, in addition to federal dollars, when we think about how we support individuals with disabilities, frequently it's tied to federal dollars that have very specific rules, and we're not thinking about a holistic approach to say, what is good for one is good for all. And I think we've seen this with changing structural buildings, creating accessible outdoor learning spaces, flipping classrooms so that it focuses on access for individuals. That has, I think, every single site that we visited, that has been a primary goal. And even when we first started, I remember Becca was very suspicious of me, as she should be. And this came up, which was, you know, we are not living our values. Our budgeting, our funding mechanism does not allow us to live our values. And I think that the community schools work that we've been doing has actually allowed people to finally resolve that cognitive dissonance, right? To say, well, you want me to invite people in, but I have all of these barriers to inviting people in. And really, we've just chipped away at those barriers, which has really come from listening and being present and letting that drive the work. Can I just say too that we have cohort meetings. So from the professional learning perspective, we have over the last 3 years met 4 times a year in addition to our individual site visits, because we also knew, and as Becca shared, we needed to connect folks because often folks had solutions to problems that other people were having. And so there's also this natural professional learning that happens simply by bringing people together.
So unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank you all for being I'm trying to read a sign and talk at the same time. Can't do 2 things at once. I want to thank you all for being a really engaged audience. I want to extend my deepest gratitude, to put into Becca's words, my people up here on the stage. You all are amazing advocates, leaders, activists, and champions of public education in Vermont. So thank you. Thank you to the Leahy Institute for putting community schools on the agenda for these 2 days. We are really proud to be here and excited to learn with and from you all. You have a break, and I'm told there is free ice cream from Sisters of Anarchy happening out there. So thank you again, and connect with us. Say hi, Catamount Community Schools Collaborative. Sorry we couldn't take more questions. Thank you.